Hello and welcome to Freedom Watch, your daily dose of raw liberty, streaming online at foxnews.com. I'm your host, Judge Andrew Napolitano, here defending freedom, defending your natural rights, and defending your right to have a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. When senior AIG executives who are threatening to leave the company do in fact leave, they will take with them AIG's best customers. Thus, because the government is now seeking to establish compensation levels at private corporations on a political model rather than on a business one, the government's refusal to pay executives what they are truly worth will damage the corporation of which the government owns 79.5%. This is more proof that the folks who have run Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, Amtrak, the Post Office, the Tennessee Valley Authority into the ground will no doubt do the same to AIG and probably to General Motors as well. Well, this morning it appears that the special compensation master recognizes the utter futility of trying to stimulate the economy by cutting compensation. And he has agreed, the government has agreed, to leave some AIG executives alone. He should leave all executives alone and go home. Joining me now is Dr. Yaron Brook, president of the Ayn Rand Institute. Yaron, welcome here. You were chuckling as I was going through the introduction, because to you and I, who believe in and actually revere the free market, this is such common sense. But to the governing class, it's anathema. Well, it's common sense, and what's going on right now is so absurd. For the government to be owning 80% of an insurance company, I mean, that is just nuts. That's not America. That maybe happens in Europe. And then for a compensation czar, just the very idea, we have czars in America. Right. For a compensation czar to be able to try even to mimic the functioning of a compensation market, how does he know if he's paying too much, too little? You know, and they're doing this not just to top companies. I mean, this is one of the illusions that are out there. But the Federal Reserve now is looking at compensation of all banks in the United States, whether they got top or not. Well, they are going to dictate compensation standards across the board. One could at least understand the logical leap between we gave you money, we're going to attach the string. Yes. They shouldn't be giving the money in the first place. Absolutely. But where no money was given, whence comes the string? Stated differently, where does the government get its constitutional, legal, or moral authority to tell a private business operating on its own with investors' money and making a product that consumers want? Where does the government come in and tell that business how much to pay its executives? Well, it doesn't have a constitutional ground at all. Indeed, it's a violation of the Constitution, and somebody should take this to the Supreme Court if the Constitution's, you know, if anybody pays attention to the Constitution anymore. You know, in legal, sure, it has a legal authority. Congress, as long as it's ignoring the Constitution, can pass any law that it wants, and it can grant the federal government that authority. But the real kicker is the morality, and this is all driven by a moral agenda, an ethical agenda that this administration, and unfortunately most of the politicians in Washington, adhere to. And that is, you know, some form of egalitarianism. The problem is that executives are making too much money, right, as compared to somebody, you know, who's sweeping the floors or who is manning the machines. And that is anathema morally to them, and that's what they're fighting against by forcing executives to take on less pay. We are chatting with Dr. Yaron Brook, who's president of the Ayn Rand Institute. When you say egalitarianism, you mean it is the core belief of the present people that run the executive branch of the government and dominate the legislative branch of the government, that everybody should be made equal, that you can make a poor man rich by making a rich man poor. Is there a single example in history where that has worked? No, and when it's been tried, it is basically, when it's been tried seriously, when people have taken these ideas seriously, what it ultimately leads to is mass death and starvation. I mean, Pol Pot tried this in Cambodia, right? Right. He had a 5 million population. He said, I want to make everybody equal. How do you make everybody equal? You kill 2 million people. You kill 40% of the population who are smarter than everybody else. That way you make it equal. That's what this kind of ideology leads to. I'm not saying that's going to happen in the U.S., but that's the root of the ideology. People have to understand that this administration and the people in Congress are motivated. Barney Frank is motivated by this ideology. And really what drives egalitarians? It's not that they care that the poor are poor. It's they hate that the rich are rich. And they're willing to have everybody poorer
as long as the rich are poorer.
And they like to have power over individuals.
Yes.
As our friend Lou Rockwell says, quoting St. Augustine, the libido dominandi, the lust to dominate.
Yes.
This transcends both political parties. Almost everybody in government has this lust to dominate. Back to the compensation czar. In getting away from theory, but to the practical economics, what is the practical consequence of the government coming in and saying to a private bank or insurance company, you can't pay these folks more than $500,000, even though they brought in $10 million worth of business, and last year you paid them 20% of what they brought in? What will happen to those people and that business and that company?
It's simple economics. If you can't pay people what they're worth, somebody else will. They will leave the industry, they will shift jobs. Future students will now want to go into banking, will now want to go into companies like AIG. You won't find managerial talent going into the auto companies. Nobody wants the real talented people, real entrepreneurs, people who have the creative spirit that it takes to run, manage a company like that, will disappear. And what you'll get instead, because there are people who will fill those slots, you'll get the bureaucrat type, the type that doesn't innovate, the type that's not entrepreneurial. And the industries will start dying out.
Right.
And if you do it on a large scale and on big American business, what will happen is those people move. There is a global market for managerial talent. China, the Chinese companies are looking for managers from the West to come in.
The good bankers will actually leave the banks in this country to find some part of the planet where the free market reigns. Interesting, they would go to a country as repressive as China. But there are pockets where there is true free market capitalism in China.
Absolutely. In many respects, the Chinese, in certain pockets, Chinese markets are less regulated, less controlled than the U.S. markets. America is still the freest country, I think, out there. But there are pockets in which particular industries you can do better over there than you can over here. But some of them will stop being bankers. Some of them will go into, a less regulated industry, let's say hedge funds, or they'll go into less regulated. Bankers, even in Europe, are less regulated than they are in the United States. American banking is more regulated than it is in Europe.
We are chatting with Dr. Yaron Brook, who's the president of the Ayn Rand Institute. Do you think that most Americans recognize that something like Social Security is patently unconstitutional, was never intended by the framers, is nowhere authorized by the Constitution, and is basically the government holding you up with a gun, saying, give me your money now, and maybe I'll return it to you in 30 or 40 years?
I like to compare Social Security to Bernie Madoff. Basically, they both are pyramid schemes.
Right.
The real difference is you had to volunteer to participate with Bernie Madoff's pyramid scheme. Social Security is worse because you're forced to participate in a pyramid scheme that everybody knows about. Now, sure, it's not constitutional, but then, 75% of all the things the government does today are not constitutional?
Easily.
Easily. And the Constitution in that sense has become, unfortunately, tragically, irrelevant to the debate. People don't care. They reread it. They reinterpret it. It's basically an empty document. And what we need to do, one of the things we need to do is resurrect it. Resurrect it as a real document.
You at the Ayn Rand Institute are one of many groups in the country that are trying to do that. And of course, we do it here on Freedom Watch. On the radio show that I share with my radio partner, Brian Kilmeade, the show is called Brian and the Judge, we actually interviewed Congressman James Clyburn, who's the #3 ranking Democrat in the House. And when I just very simply and off the cuff said to him, Congressman, where in the Constitution is the federal government authorized to manage health care? He said to me, Judge, most of what we do down here, referring to Washington, is not authorized in the Constitution. Here's their theory. Their theory is they want to get reelected. They're going to get as big a piece of the pie for their constituents. They're going to do what they think their constituents want of them, irrespective of the Constitution, irrespective of the long-term consequences, irrespective of the natural law, of Economics 101, and let the court worry about whether or not it's constitutional.
And the court doesn't anymore, because the court has lost what it really means to be constitutional, and therefore the court lets them get away with all of this. This is why politics is not where this game is going to be changed, not where this world is going to be changed. We get the politicians we deserve. We get the courts. It's the American public that is ignorant here, and it's the American public that has allowed itself to drift away from the principles of the Constitution. And where the real work is not in Washington. The real work is in the high schools and the universities of this country. We need to re-educate.
When we were talking before the show started, we're talking about probably our favorite novel, called Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. And I know you're going to be talking about it with my buddy and college buddy, John
Oh, wow,
Stossel.
didn't know that.
What would you say to a person that hadn't read the novel is the lesson that Ayn Rand wanted to deliver with that unbelievable, prescient story where she practically predicted up to the present moment what the federal government would be doing to us?
Well, at the political level, what she shows is what happens when government intervention is out of control like it is in America today. What are the consequences of that, and what are the consequences to individual lives, and what businessmen are likely to do, which is, as we see with AIG,
They give in.
they're going to leave, or they're going to buy into the system, and you get a split between the good businessmen who stand up and are therefore forced out of the business world, and the kind of the moochers